65 years. That's the age when most people are drawing their pension, but it's also just how old the original Nuova Fiat 500 is. The genius work of Dante Giacosa, realised in this wonderful, instantly recognisable shape that was relaunched in 2007, and let's face it, you now see them everywhere.
But it's easy to forget that the name 500 was actually revived a bit sooner than that, with the Cinquecento, a more modern Fiat city car that featured the same cutesy styling, the same cheeky Fiat character, and the same fantastic use of packaging, but in a more modern car. So with this car being nearly 40 years newer than its 1950s namesake, which is best, and indeed, which one do we prefer?
But first, our friends at Lancaster Insurance are running monthly giveaways. You can win all sorts, from experience days to tools, restaurant vouchers and tech. So click the link below at the end of the video to enter their latest competition.
It's quite loud and Dante Giacosi in here. So here we are in the Fiat 500.
Dante Giacosa's masterpiece. Now, of course, to give it its full title, Nuova 500, because Fiat had already made a 500 before this one, the Topolino.
Wow.
So they called it the Nuova, which is Italian for new, to kind of connect the Topolino.
Yeah, and of course those early cars weren't an instant success. They only had 13 horsepower, courtesy of a 479cc engine, and just 2 seats initially. So Fiat quickly upped power a little bit, put some back seats in, and a success story was born.
Indeed it was. Now, like the Mini, of course, the 500 was primarily born partly to mobilise the masses, and indeed it was Italy's cheapest car eventually, but it was also responsible for the Suez Canal crisis, because of course shortages in fuel meant you needed every last mile you could get out of a gallon. Indeed, the early Nuovas with the 479 could allegedly do over 60 miles to the gallon. Take that, Prius.
The Nuova was replaced by the 500D, which had an 18 horsepower 499cc engine. That bit more practical, a bit more usable, and just added to the appeal. And of course the early ones had suicide doors as well, up until 1965.
And while we're talking about the styling, that is arguably this car's big party piece, particularly as a classic today, because just look at it. It's gorgeous, and it's so minimalist. There's so little to it. There's a few curves. There's not really much in their chrome dressing. This particular one's got those cute little overrider bumpers on it.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
It looks gorgeous, and it's so minimalist.
And it's kind of hard for me to admit, because obviously I'm a huge classic Mini fan.
Are you? I've never noticed.
Yeah, and I actually owned a Fiat 126, which I bought in Poland and drove all the way home in 40 hours. I always thought, well, it's got to be miles better than a 500. And in a couple of ways it is, but this is so ahead of its time, and as a classic Mini fan I can really appreciate that. I'm not sure the Mini would have been as good as it was without this little masterpiece as a reference point.
For a start, this wasn't supposed to be some little 2-person runaround. When they put back seats in it, this was pitched as a family car. You put mum and dad and the kids in the back, and I'm 6 foot tall and I'm not complaining for space in here.
No, it's remarkably roomy.
The fact is, we're still not up against each other. I can still lean up here on the door and feel utterly stylish with this vinyl roof open. Now, the early 500s all had a rollback vinyl roof, and that wasn't for a style statement. That was because at that point, post-war Italy was a very cash-strapped country and crucially quite steel-strapped. Fiat decided to take most of the steel roof out because steel was hard to come by, make the roof out of vinyl to save costs and save metalwork.
Nice little pause on that gearbox, so I don't rush it too much. But that is the thing, and why they're all so fun is you can absolutely wring the neck out of them. Because they're not particularly quick, 18 horsepower in the later ones.
You can use all of it.
You can use all of it, and that's what the whole fun of this car is, that little twin singing behind you. And it's singing quite loudly.
Very loudly. But this is the thing, the Italian driving style, most Italians, when they're driving a Fiat or a Ferrari, will ring them right out to the end where the valves are bouncing out of the bonnet, or indeed the rear hatch in this case, and use all of it. But with a car that's only got 18 horsepower, you can still use all of it and know that you're nowhere near in danger of breaking the speed limit. I mean, we're on a 70-mile-an-hour road now doing 75 kilometres an hour, so it feels pretty brisk when your doors are millimetres thick, and that's the thing, it's exhilarating. This wasn't just some cheap utilitarian box on wheels. It was fun, it put a smile on your face.
That's it. The genius was to have such a practical, compact little car that put a smile on your face at the same time and look the part as well.
Stunning.
You could put this in any sort of Milan fashion shoot and it still looks good.
It works by creating something so simple but so stylish, so practical, and like we said, you haven't stopped smiling, I haven't stopped smiling. It makes you happy. Fiat Fiat sold 3.9 million of these things.
You can't help but love it. You can't help but love it.
And it's still wonderful.
Still absolutely wonderful.
And we've just had a look and a thumbs up from a bloke in a transit van. It still makes people happy, no matter who you are, where you're from.
It's a cheerful car, isn't it? It's a smiling car. The sun is shining on this little car and it just makes you happy.
It might be controversial, but I don't think there's a single car that's so small, that's so affordable, but that's so stylish and makes you smile quite this much.
Oh,
sorry, Mini fans.
It's hard for me to agree to that, but you might have just a squeak of a point.
Go, go, go!
So Joe, the sun's gone in. We're now in a grey, dreary Fiat Cinquecento, and you're not even wearing sunglasses anymore. So convince me this is a decent car.
Well, it's worth noting before we go any further, I'm not entirely unbiased towards this car, because my first car, and indeed I still own it, and I have done for years, and I probably always will, is a Cinquecento, which is this car's successor, which is 600, where this is 500. So I'm not quite as unbiased as I normally claim to be with this one. But this is a more modern car than the 500 that we've just driven, so you are going to get less chrome work and less tinniness, because by the 90s that was less acceptable. Now, FSM, who are a Polish company, were actually doing lots of research and development into making a small city car, and they'd actually gone so far as a prototype called the Best Kid. Fiat took over FSM in the late 80s, early 90s, and whilst that specific car never came to be, the project lived on because they evolved it into their next city car, because the 126 was really outdated by that point, and the Panda was a successful small car, but it was just a little bit bigger. The next city car by Fiat, they decided to go back to their roots and use the name 500 again. They went for the word version, not the number version, which is Cinquecento, resulting in the car we see today, which was built entirely in FSM's plant in Poland, in a little town called Tychy. Very apt. Very apt for such a titchy car, don't you think?
And actually, it's quite ahead of its time, wasn't it?
Really was. One of Fiat's most advanced cars. In fact, it was fully independent suspension, it was galvanised so it didn't rust, and it had crumple zones built into the body, so if you were hit in an accident, you were less likely to be injured, and side impact bars in the doors as well.
To be fair, I mean, this one, it's not rusty, is it?
It's not, it's
not rusty. Despite being advanced, the engine, possibly a little bit more dated.
Yeah, so you could get these with a carryover engine from the 126, which was essentially a bored-out version of the engine we saw in the 500, and that was really outdated two-cylinder. But this particular car has got the 899, the Tipo 100 engine, one of the final iterations of one of the engines you could get in the Fiat 600, the bigger brother of the 500 we were just in. Right. So, in actuality, the engine in this car isn't that far distant from the engine in the little 500. And you know what, if you give it some...
Yeah, it's smooth, isn't it? It's remarkably smooth. And I'll tell you, it's remarkably comfortable. And like the Fiat 500 felt big for its size, this is roomy, isn't it? It's roomy. I'll be a critic here. It's because they forgot to style it.
It is a very, very square car, isn't it? Much like a Fiat Panda.
I quite like the front, the crisp angular lines at the front, but then they got to the back and they just chopped it off.
But there is a benefit to that, because this is a city car, don't forget. The back window, you can see, that is the back of the car. And that means you can park it square onto anything, and if you live in Italy, square onto the curb. But despite being a very small, very cheap car, you could option air conditioning. You could get aircon in these cars, an airbag in later life, and an electric rollback Webasto roof, sir. We come onto this dual carriageway here. Let's give it some.
Leany.
A little bit of body roll.
She's a little bit body rolly, but then that's just in the spirit of the original.
But you razz it out and it gives you
so
all it's got.
The Sporting had an 1108cc engine, is that correct?
53 horsepower, sir, yeah. And that was, of course, the Crackerjack Boy Racer Special. But even your shopping car one, which is much like we saw in the Nova, something to have fun in. It was simple. I mean, this one now, razzing along, having a great time.
Do you know what? It's actually smooth. I mean, we are now cracking onto 70 mile an hour and a truck's just pulled out brilliantly in front of us.
But you know what?
Nice and agile. And it's quite quiet, isn't it? It's certainly a world away from the 500L we were just in.
It's really refined.
Of course, this was up against the reborn Mini Cooper, or at least the Sporting. And objectively, this was miles ahead.
This was a far more modern car, and as we said,
a far more modern car.
A really quite advanced car for its day. Really nice and refined, and proof that you could have a small city car that could nip round town, could do 45 to the gallon, and it's got the extra safety and the extra technology. It's not fast, no denying it, but it's so revvy. Yeah, it's so keen to go.
It just inspires that sort of willingness to wring its neck.
Which I am doing.
Which is what all little Fiats should be about.
It's just so much fun.
The new Fiat 500 not the Nuova, but the new one. Would you say this is more of a spiritual successor to the original than that?
Yes, because the packaging just isn't anywhere near as clever, and the design comes from specific tailored design, not simplicity. Whereas this, it's simple and it's effective and it's cheeky and it makes you smile, and the effective design and the cleverness that was there with the Nuova is still here, because this is a dinky little car by 90s standards. It still fits 4 people in it, it's refined as you said, it's spacious enough, and it's proof that Fiat's small car genius lived on.
I am reluctantly impressed with it. It's comfy and
it's great fun.
Belies its tiny dimensions, and I'm begrudgingly impressed.
It's great, isn't it?
It's not as grey as the exterior colour would suggest. It's actually a fizzy little thing.
You and I love a small car.
Yep, we do.
If you had your 2 small car garage, have this as your daily driver and have your Nuova as your weekend fun car, does that not just say perfect?
It does sound perfect, yeah. Convinced myself pretty hard not to put a Mini in there. I mean, I could have an Innocenti, couldn't I?
There you
Italian
go.
style.
All Italian.
And that's not a bad garage, is it?
Fantastic.
It's Cinquecento and the lovely 500L that we drove earlier.
I've been dying to get some more Fiats on the channel, and I'm in my happy place today.
This video is proudly sponsored by Lancaster Insurance. Give them a call on 01480 400 889 for an insurance quote on your classic car. And don't forget to click the link below to enter their latest competition.